High-profile broadcaster Jeremy Clarkson appears set to lose his TV shows on Amazon Prime after he was widely criticised for a column he wrote in The Sun about the Duchess of Sussex. Among other remarks, Clarkson said he hated Markle and dreamt of the day she was made to parade naked through the streets while crowds chanted at her. He has publicly apologised for the column, but in the furore that followed the remarks, Amazon have reportedly decided not to renew Clarkson's shows, although a spokesman denied the events were connected. Tom Slater, the editor of Spiked, wrote about this for The Spectator this week, and he joins me now. Tom, welcome to the show. Now, some of the remarks seemed pretty harsh, didn't they, when it came to Meghan Markle? What was going on there?
I think it was a botched joke, effectively. It's the sort of outrageous thing that Jeremy Clarkson is paid to say, essentially. Not, this is his brand, this is what he does. And I think what seemed to happen here is he just didn't really land it. He's even spoken in some of his apologies about how the fact that he didn't really feel like he pulled that one off. I think the problem is that there is a startling level of hypocrisy in the end of this, because I think anyone who would read that column, they might be offended by it, they might be upset by it, they might have thought it had gone too far. But I don't think it's a fair read to say this is willful incitement of violence against women or Meghan Markle or anyone at all. It's a kind of willful hyperbole. And whether you like that or not is up to you. But I don't think that should justify calls for people to be sacked and sentenced.
I got it as a joke straight away because I understood the Game of Thrones reference. It's a reference to Cersei Lannister walking through the town naked while people chant shame at her. That was the reference. And it was deliberately hyperbolic for shock effect. And sure, I'm with people who say that's distasteful, that's offensive. But it's actually had these ramifications. They're denying it, but it does look like Clarkson's Farm and the Grand Tour, both Jeremy Clarkson shows are going to be ditched now. Is that right?
Well, that seems to be the reporting. So Variety last week was suggesting that these shows were for the chop. There's been reporting since suggesting that there might actually be commercial calculations going on here, them underperforming and so on. But I don't think you can, whilst all of that will come out in the wash, I don't think we can deny that the campaign to get him cancelled was very clearly ended towards kicking him off of his particular shows. And even in some cases, people were talking, Chris Packham, formerly the BBC, talking about the fact that he should be prosecuted for this. So I don't think whatever happens in the end of this, we can't say this was just a case of these companies taking decisions in a vacuum.
I mean, that's come to be quite normal now, the idea that people are calling for people to be prosecuted. When Jo Brand made her joke, people said she should be prosecuted as well. That seems to be the go-to. Why have we reached this point in society where we can't just say, I find that really hideous and offensive, I really dislike that, I've got my right to criticise it, rather than, let's phone the police, let's have this person sacked. Why is that now the go-to thing?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why have we ended up completely abandoning all of those proper liberal principles, which is summed up by exactly what you say. I mean, people kind of confuse their own taste and their own kind of offence level with when something should be met with the full force of the law. These two things should not necessarily be equated. But I'm glad you brought up Jo Brand, because I think that's a perfect example of the sort of thing that we're talking about. When she made that joke back in 2019 about, throwing battery acid on Nigel Farage, I don't think anyone could literally hear that and think she is inciting violence against Nigel Farage. It was another case of a joke that didn't land, that upset certain people, that was hyperbolic to express her dislike of a particular individual. How is this any different? And I think going forward, one way that we can start to push back against cancel culture is for anyone who's critical of it to make sure you defend both of those people from different tribes in all instances. Otherwise, this weapon's going to be wielded time and time again.
So consistency, in other words. But is part of the problem that we do have laws on the statute books that criminalise people for being offensive? Isn't that the problem? Shouldn't we just get rid of them?
I think so. I think that's part of the root of the problem. The fact that cancel culture exists also flows from the fact that we have hate speech laws, that we have laws that restrict speech in all different kinds of ways. People will say, well, if people can be locked up for saying something offensive, why shouldn't they at least be sacked for saying something offensive? So you do have to win the argument more broadly. I think the problem with cancel culture, which makes it so slippery, which is what the Clarkson case really is an example of, is the fact that it's the attempts to punish people kind of outside the frame of the law. Can we get them sacked? Can we get them demonised? Can we get them unpersoned?
Yes.
That's a slipperier thing to argue about. It definitely stems from the same censorious impulse.
It feels tribal, because I can't help but notice that the people... I haven't heard many voices say, I really hated what Clarkson had to say, I found that horrible, but I don't want him to be sacked. I haven't heard much of that. It's just been that a sort of way to exploit the system, to get someone silenced.
No, completely. And people do this knowingly and willfully. But I think with all of the double standards in this, I think it just explodes the idea that this is about anything other than trying to bring down someone who some people don't like and who was, in this case, criticising a figure, Meghan Markle, who has risen to sort of secular sainthood in certain quarters. I mean, it was fascinating to see Claudia Webb MP for Leicester sign that letter, about 60 MPs, writing to The Sun on Sunday, condemning the column, saying he should be punished and so on, who was, again, actually taken through court and given a suspended sentence for harassment for threatening to acid attack someone. So, you know, when you realise the double standards in all this,
Yes.
all of the kind of high-minded rhetoric about accountability for things that people have said, we shouldn't use our language too saltily and whatever, you start to see that that's not really the game that's being played here. We need to get away from that we need to recognise those double standards, I think, make a principled case, and then we might start to be getting somewhere again.
Interesting that's coming from politicians as well, isn't it? That's very bizarre. Tom Slater, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.